Welcome back to the Practical Spirituality Podcast. We are so excited to have you on this journey with us, where we explore all elements of mind, body, emotions, and soul through the lens of everyday life. On this week's episode, we start to deconstruct the law of attraction and manifestation by examining different parts of the equation that aren't often talked about. Hi, Gareth. How are you?
Doing good. How are you feeling?
I've got a bit of a cold, a little bit of a headache, but I really wanted to get into this topic with you tonight. So I don't know how I'm going to go, but let's dive in.
But we're here.
We are here. One of the things I thought that we could talk about tonight is the law of attraction and manifestation, because you and I have often spoke about it privately. And we have quite a few things to say about it.
We have a love-hate relationship with it. And I think we're going to explore that tonight. But I do think it's a love-hate relationship with it because we've had so many contradicting experiences, information over many years. And as you mentioned, wasn't it over 20 years for you?
Yeah.
So I think that's why I'm actually very intrigued to see how this conversation goes and see the listeners actually, can they relate to some of our successful encounters with the law of attraction and manifestation, maybe some of the disappointment, but even some of the guilt or some of the times, I guess, we felt it was our fault or how we were getting our own way. So hopefully throughout this conversation, we'll begin to touch on clearing that up a little bit or just exploring it firsthand.
Well, exploring it and maybe also getting some of our listeners' input on how's it worked for them and what's happened for them if they've tried the law of attraction and manifestation, because I think I'd really be intrigued to hear what other people's experiences are with it.
So why don't you start? What was your introduction to it many moons ago?
Many, many moons ago, the very first time I had a try of it, I had just finished a university course in photography, creative arts, and I really wanted to go work on cruise ships. So a friend of mine had told me to do a vision board, and I did. I went to the store, I got all these pictures. She gave me instructions on how to do it. I was really excited about it because I love travel. And 6 weeks later, I was signing a contract to go work on a cruise ship. Mm-hmm. So I thought it was a huge success. I loved it. I thought that I was 10 foot tall and bulletproof because I had manifested this job. It was great. And so I loved that particular experience. What about yours?
Because I know we've talked about this in private. I think even in previous episodes that I've talked about is that it was more I was exposed to a lot of these kind of things from a young age because my family got quite involved in it. And I think anyone from 2005 onwards was really exposed to, and don't get me wrong, of course it was around prior to that, but I'm saying in my household it was around that time that it became a big deal or an obsession for a lot of people to begin exploring it. So, and because at that stage I was still relatively young, I maybe wasn't necessarily practicing it myself, but I was definitely in the environment of a lot of people who were practicing it really deeply, a lot of adults. So, but as we would have talked about before, I guess now looking back, one of the main themes of law of attraction back then was a lot of people were manifesting or using the law of attraction for more materialistic things for themselves in their lives. I don't really have that many memories of people manifesting or trying to use the law of attraction for better health or to help with some of maybe their negative experiences that they didn't know how to process. It was always quite materialistic. And I don't know if that's also been your experience, is that it's normally been used to try to attract a new job, a new car, maybe sometimes even a new partner. So it's always things that we think is going to elevate our lives or make us happier in some way. But would you say that's also been your experience through exposure to it over many years?
I definitely would say that's been my experience. And so, because for me, it had been around much longer than what you just talked about. Yeah. I'm not going to go in for how long. And to be fair, in the early days, whenever I would do that sort of thing, I would get exactly what I was trying to manifest. But I didn't do it very often because there wasn't a lot that I was seeking at that moment. There were a few things and I would apply it and it would work until I applied it and it didn't work. And then I was confused and I didn't understand and I couldn't understand. I think even the first day that time I spoke with you, this was one of the topics I brought up because I was so confused about the hit and the miss. How come sometimes I'm so spot on and I can manifest exactly what I've put down that I want to manifest, and other times, no matter how hard I tried, it wasn't happening.
Yep. And again, I think that in itself is such an interesting subject because, and that's what I mentioned at the start of this recording, I think our approaches to the law of attraction manifestation has changed a lot over the last 5-10 years. And I think this is what we want to do this episode about. It's not necessarily disregarding the law of attraction manifestation, but maybe communicating how our relationship with this subject or with our definitions towards it has evolved quite a bit, and I'm sure will continue to. But for myself, like most things we talk about on this podcast, is that it changed for me drastically when Michael came into my life. There's no doubt about it. And I guess it comes back down to logically questioning a lot of the information that's already out there. And as we talked about in previous episodes, we've never been given the tools or maybe even had the confidence to question logically the law of attraction, to understand it, does it actually make sense? And I think like most things in spirituality or new age, we tend to be more emotionally invested into the idea of it more than actually questioning, does it make sense, and or is it actually providing the results with the input and effort I'm putting in. That's where I think we always get to an interesting conclusion, any of us, if we actually want to take that time and wanted to be that brutally honest with ourselves. But even coming back to some of the stuff we covered in season 1, how does the law of attraction and manifestation actually come into it when it comes back down to your life being planned out for you? You have a contract that you are living by day to day and everything's been pre-decided. So under that circumstance, how can law of attraction or manifestation actually work under those conditions? I remember that being really confusing to me when I started questioning, going, but no, but I've been taught for decades now that I can have anything, I can be anything, I can attract anything, I just have to get out of my own way. And if I'm not receiving something, then I'm doing something wrong and I need to work harder, buy a new course, do another book. So therefore, it was like two worlds colliding. And as you mentioned, it can leave you quite confused because I think in spirituality or new age subjects, there's a lot of different angles to any of these things, and it gets very confusing to which one is the per se quote unquote right one or the correct one. And when reality is, we even talked about in the last episode, there's not a right one or correct one per se. It's about actually what makes sense for you in mind, body, emotions, soul, where you are in your period in life now. Do you agree?
I would 100% agree. And I think it comes back down to, for me, as the years have gone by and I've been looking at the different things, it's like trying to understand why some people have a certain life that we look at and think it's all peaches and cream and easy.
Yep.
And then others of us have had a life full of, hardship and trauma and, having to work hard. And you want to sit there and look at the two, and why is that the case? And I would say people say the same thing with the law of attraction and manifestation. For me, and I'm just going to go back to season 1 when we talked about sacred or the contracts, how we all have a contract. That is what started to help me understand. Because when law of attraction became really, really popular, when you were talking about in 2005 and whatever, by that time in my life, I had started to do a certain amount of growing. I was helping people already, and I was starting to understand different things about how life ticked. And when I say that, I mean, like I had to study the neurobiology of addiction. So I had to understand what the mind was doing. I had a lot more logical input on what things that were happening. So for me, it started becoming really popular. And I felt like, hang on, they're cheating. They're cheating because they've left out part of the equation. Not that they meant to, but I'm sure that other part of the equation just doesn't sell very well. And so for me, that was confusing as well.
And I actually think, and I know we'll get into both sides of it, and I'm sure we'll play devil's advocate for this as well, but it's that there's so many, like anything actually that's considered mainstream, I think you can always find that there's downsides to anything mainstream for someone's mental and emotional health, period.
Mhm.
And if something's is saying it can be applied to millions or billions of people, there's something not quite adding up, because that was even part of the logic that you and I would have questioned before, is that if this law of attraction manifestation can work 100% without fail, then how does that work if 8 billion people are manifesting or constantly using the law of attraction to get what they want? Surely that would cause mass imbalance in this world. And therefore, why isn't that working if it's so 100% certain that this is one of the laws of the universe, so to speak, that you would hear all the time? It's only when we start diving into it that you actually see, and it's only when you're removed from it after all these years, as you and I both know, we were in the middle of it at one point using
Right.
it. But I think what you and I had in common when we were actually in the middle of it trying to manifest, use the law of attraction or manifestation, sometimes you would get to the end result of actually feeling that, God, I'm the problem, or I'm the
Yes.
one getting in my way, or I need to work harder. And it actually became the internal critic. Actually, the volume was turned up a little bit, which actually contradicted it, because then you're not allowed to have, per se, an internal critic. Otherwise, that stops you from manifesting what you actually want, because that stops you from being able to feel the experience that they tell you to have in order to manifest it. So it becomes more of a complicated internal battle of, well, as you and I both know, it's not easy to turn off that internal critic. You can't turn off your negative emotions. Life still happens even when you're trying to manifest. So therefore, it becomes law of attraction or manifestation is an argument where it helps fund avoidance. And then because it was always a growing community of manifestors and law of attraction, is that it was easy to find a community that was also trying to avoid the negative stuff or the things that were going on in their life, in hopes to create a better life. Don't get me wrong. I know people, more often than not, their intentions were right. But I think the law of attraction and manifestation was always too simplified, that it actually caused potentially more harm than good for a lot of people. I know that's not everyone's experience, but as we talked about before, is that if you're manifesting 20 things and one or two of those things actually happens in reference to you getting the job, it's very easy to be like, see it worked.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't take much in order for us to actually to reinforce that belief, is kind of the point when we really want to believe something.
Yes. And I think it's fair to say, I've manifested quite a few things over the years.
Mm.
Have I manifested everything that I wanted to manifest? No, I haven't. And that, like the day that I met you, that was one of my questions. Why is it that sometimes I can manifest and other times I can't? And, when you were just speaking then, I had this image of a particular person I used to follow many years ago. They were talking about the law of attraction and
Yep.
how that they had done a vision board and they had a house, and that they had that vision board in front of their desk for years. And 20 years later, they sold a house, moved, and they happened to move into the same house that was on the vision board.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely thrilling.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know how many people actually heard 20 years later.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that, sparked my memory. I'm like, oh, so that was a bit of a delay in the manifestation process. It actually happened.
Yep.
But how many people would be willing to go, oh, yeah, 20 years later, I got it. And not that by the time the particular person got the house, I'm sure they didn't even care whether they got the house or not. It was just a progression of events in their life.
Agreed. And I think this is why it's actually exciting to have this conversation, to be able to talk it out more, because you and I have both experienced manifestation, and I think we can make arguments for different ways in which it worked. But for me at this stage, and I'm not speaking on your behalf, but I'm saying in my experience, manifestation and law of attraction can work according to your experience in life, as long, and I'm conditioning it, as long as you're also equally working on mind, body, emotion, soul. Then you'll actually find that if you're working on those different components, there's nothing stopping you or getting in your own way of being able to accomplish that or to get towards that, especially if you're not putting a restrictive timeline on it, like the 20 years thing. You can get to that particular place. You can get better finances. You can get to the partner that you've been searching for. But I think it's that if we're not willing to work on ourselves, put the relevant steps in place, all of these different things. But I think a lot of the law of attraction, books, courses, seminars, is that they overly simplify it to simply be that you sit in a room, you attract, And basically, you don't have to take any steps forward. That's all you have to do. You just have to feel it, imagine it, and it will happen. And I think it's actually the overly simplified version that is the problem, not the concept or the idea of law of attraction or manifestation in general.
I agree. And what I find about that oversimplified version is no one ever tells you how to deal with the inner critic. No one ever teaches you about you need to clear up whatever negative experiences or understandings that you had in the past, because they're not going to just magically go poof because we're thinking positively. And if you think about just the equilibrium of that, if you have a scale and you've got 50 pounds of negativity and you've got 5 pounds of positively, what's going to win? You know, that's the point that I really like to help people understand. It's like, sure, I do believe that it will work, but you've got to get rid of all this negativity and add more to the self-belief and being at peace and being in harmony, mind, body, soul, emotions. Because again, like you were saying, everybody thinks it's about, and I don't want to say everybody, lots of people think it's about attracting that physical thing.
Yep.
I know for me, and here's the truth. If I had a dime for every time somebody said, how did you manage to clear your past and become the person you are? Because in the field that I'm in, I am one of the few miracles. Okay. I think today's world, there's a lot more people being able to clear up some of their past because there's a lot more information. But from the time that I first got sober to now, there weren't that many people who were doing it successfully. And I could tell you honestly, Gareth, for the first 15 years, I never had an answer for that. And then after a while, I started seeing the number one thing that keeps coming to my mind is perseverance. I just wouldn't give up. I just knew that I needed to continue to find a way to understand why I was feeling and doing the things I was feeling and doing. And people seem to want to make that seem easy, but there were so many days I wanted to quit. So many days that I thought, this is really not worth it. Now, as I sit here today, I can tell you, oh my gosh, I would stick with this path and plan that I went on rather than hitting the lottery any day of the week.
But I think that's what opens up a very interesting conversation is in when you're starting the law of attraction or manifestation, what is driving you to, what's the starting point? What's the goal that you're actually trying to get to? Or what is driving your need to want to attract X, Y, and Z? So I know there's people that, as we talked about, it can be for financial, it can be for the bigger house, it can be for the bigger salary, whatever it might be. And then for some people, it can be actually the wanting to manifest answers to relieve the grievance of a loved one, or to mend a broken heart, or to find the answer, or to heal from cancer. Or there can be people who actually use the manifestation of law of attraction to try to heal themselves in a lot of respects as well. I think it's interesting to understand what angle is the person approaching the law of attraction or manifestation with, because I think the results will be different depending on the approach or the definitions that you're putting onto the law of attraction or manifestation. But I think to throw a bit of a spanner in the works is that when I got plugged into Michael, as we talked about in a previous episode as well, what actually starts making the law of attraction and the idea of the law of attraction or manifestation redundant is the having that contract, as we talked about. But then what I actually noticed is that if you're at peace with everything in mind, body, emotion, soul, you don't want to attract anything, and you don't need to attract anything. You don't need to manifest everything because you're at peace to start with.
Yes, but how many people are at that stage?
But I think that's exactly the point, is that what are you starting with is kind of the point when it comes to wanting to manifest or actually wanting to attract into your life. What are you not at peace with that you think that what you're going to attract will solve that?
That's what I was going to say. So many people believe that if they have this, then they'll be happy. Or if they have that's when life will get easier.
Yeah.
And I guess, again, you said that before, it depends on where you're starting from. And all of us start from different levels whenever we find this information. And so, correct. Yes, some of us do believe, well, if I have the house and the husband or partner, then I'm going to be okay. And then life is going to be better. Not understanding that we need to be the person we want to attract in our life.
Yeah. And no matter what we attract or we apparently attract, is that there's always new problems or new things to be able to solve because, as we talked about in the previous episode, our primary focus while here as spiritual beings in a human body is to actually grow in mind, body, emotions, and soul. So I think that's why at times the law of attraction and manifestation is actually built to succeed, but it's actually equally built to fail. Because when it fails, it actually forces us to feel the emotions that we've been avoiding our entire lives. And then presto, there's more growth there, whether we like it or not. So, but I think it comes back down to, if we want to avoid the fact that the law of attraction or manifestation didn't work within the timeline that we'd chosen, we can choose to avoid that if we want. We're good at avoiding things that we don't want to look at in our lives. We're all experts in it, quite frankly. But I think it's that, like anything, I've noticed that with anyone I've worked with, or the people around me over many, many years, is that that avoidance only lasts so long before we actually begin to question it ourselves to some degree, because the results speak for themselves is kind of the point. And it's not about being right or wrong, because I don't think there is that component when it comes to spirituality, as we've talked about so many times before in our individual journeys. But I think it goes back to that importance of any of us being able to morph or evolve or redefine these things that suit us for where we are in our lives is kind of the point. And I think this is why you and I do not throw law of attraction or manifestation out the window. We've just changed or morphed it to suit our needs as our understandings around them have also evolved or changed. So you and I would probably say now, and please correct me because I'm not trying to speak on your behalf, but it's probably have come to the understanding sitting here now is that we can manifest or attract according to what's already in our contract. So what we're meant to experience while here. So we are manifesting, we are using the law of attraction. But in saying that, we also know you have to work in mind, body, emotion, soul. You have to put an action plan in place. You have to put goals in place. You have to have good support around you. And then you will continue to attract and you'll continue to manifest with the things that you need or you are meant to experience throughout this life, which is very different to what's being taught out in the industry.
I absolutely agree with that. And so if we take my life as an example, before I got sober, the types of people and experiences I was attracting in my life were pretty negative and soul destroying, for lack of a better way of saying it. That's just where I was at that stage. And I know many people listening to this podcast have heard me say this before. Once I stepped on this journey of growth and understanding myself, for many years, I felt like every time I get my head above water, it would get dunked back down. And I felt very frustrated with that process. But at the same time, I started to notice the changes. Here is a prime example of this. When I was still using back then, and even the first 5 or 6 years after I got clean and sober, if I went into public, I felt like I was a magnet for every strange person. I'm going to choose my words wisely. For every strange person out there. And I couldn't understand it. I used to go around and I even said it to my husband when we were first married. Why is it these people navigate towards me? And I didn't understand because I hadn't cleaned up a lot of my own experiences at that point. Then as I started to learn about myself and I started to change, started to have more acceptance of who I am and more love for myself, that was one of the very first things I noticed was that I wasn't attracting that type of person anymore. Not that there's anything wrong with those people, but it was just that where I was at on this journey was different. And so therefore I was attracting a different type of person. We can call that the law of attraction and manifestation because I do believe it is. And people might not understand that, but it is exactly that. So now we go to the stage I'm at now. And when I work with people and they get frustrated with some of the work they have to put in, I often use the phrase, if I could take you and put you in my body for 30 seconds to feel the difference of where you are and where I am, not that I feel like I'm better off, but the balance and the peace I feel is so much better, you wouldn't give up. So for me, that is kind of the real law of attraction working, because the more that I actually, and I will use that word, persevered and continued to look inward and work on what I needed to work on for myself, the exterior world changed around me. If you had told me in my 20s that I would be a teacher and helping people in the way that I'm helping people, I would have laughed in your face because I never thought I'd have that ability. Yet here I am doing that. And that's not because I think I'm some fantastic person, but because I've changed so much and I have a desire to help other people change.
Some of those old teachings or old sayings that appear time and time again is that the lesson will continue to repeat itself until we've learned fully from it. And I think you can call it law of attraction and manifestation if you want, but those kind of lessons or teachings, they tend to be really tough and negative and hard to process. And for most of us, we weren't given the tools to be able to actually understand how to navigate them, how to put ourselves in a better position. And that's why I was mentioning earlier that I think the concept of the law of attraction manifestation is that you can just kind of hope or wish that it will change. What's not taught enough is that there has to be really key actionable points of actually allowing yourself to get the support, to be vulnerable, to ask for the help, to receive it, and to be openly honest about what you're going through. But I think it's that a lot of people in spirituality or New Age, and not everybody, of course, as you mentioned earlier, but it's that if we're in denial about the experiences we're actually going through, or the reality of where we're at in mind, body, emotions, and soul, then you're inevitably going to keep, as you were mentioning, repeating those patterns, repeating those experiences, attracting those people, because the lesson has not been learned yet. And as we talked about, according to the contract of the experiences we go through, we're here to grow. So until we grow from them, they're most likely, in theory, going to continue to repeat. And then once we do have that aha moment and be able to grow from it in mind, body, emotions, soul, it's amazing how things naturally do become a little bit better over time. And the clearer we are in mind, body, emotions, and soul, the more in the flow we are with life. Not that I ever feel we're ever out of flow with life. It's just we were never taught logically what the flow of life looks like. And that's where there can be confusion or a disconnect within our minds about it.
I agree. And I think understanding that and understanding that the more that we work on mind, body, soul, and emotions, that will allow us to get to a point where we can attract more things that we would find desirable, that we would have not. I found this all desirable back then, but it felt unattainable. Where it's no longer unattainable. I can't even imagine living the way that I used to live now, which for me is a great thing. But at the same time, there was a lot of work put into that. It didn't just happen because I sat there and went, I'm sober, I'm sober, I'm sober, I'm sober.
But I think it's even the work, as you mentioned, that, as we talked about, that needs to be continued on an ongoing basis. It's never ending. But I think what makes the idea of that impossible for us even 10, 20 years ago, and for a lot of people potentially listening now, is that we wouldn't have a problem with it if we were told from day one that this is actually what life is like, and this is what you should expect from life. And I think it's the idea that a lot of these people in the industry are saying it's so easy and just have to do step 1, step 2, step 3. Then that's what constantly feeds ourselves that we're the problem, or why isn't it this easy for me or us? And I think that's where, as I mentioned earlier a few times, is that it can be really, I say, damaging to someone's mental and emotional health, for someone who's actually, per se, quite vulnerable and trying to make their lives better. But once you get into that cycle of law of attraction and manifestation, and if there's not enough logic applied to it, of our ability to question it, it can potentially do more damage than good for a period of time. But again, that's partly the lesson I think you and I could say we've experienced in our journeys also.
Well, absolutely. And I, in defense of some of these people that teach it that way, I don't know if that is their intention. I think sometimes when somebody has gone through something so many times, they forget what the beginning part of the journey was like. They forget whatever roadblocks they might have hit, and some of the work that they themselves put in as well, or they just don't publicly speak about it.
Yep.
And that doesn't mean that they didn't go through it, because I'm sure that they did on some level. And I think that was one of the things for me, especially when I wanted to help people. It was like, I've got to remember what this felt like in the beginning and start from that step instead of telling them about where I'm at now. Because if I only talk about now, of course, life seems really easy compared to when I first got clean and sober. And people often look at me and they go, oh, you make it seem so easy. And I'm like, well, I've got 38 years of practicing it so far. So one would hope that I have some experience in how to work with my mind, body, emotion.
Definitely.
But that doesn't mean that I'm going to ignore the fact that some people are at the very beginning and they're going to find some of that difficult.
But I think going back to even the name of the podcast, as you even mentioned in the last episode, Practical Spirituality, we just want people to be able to question where they're at and whatever they're involved in or with, is it actually working for you? Because as you mentioned, with a lot of the teachers or people that are selling these courses, teaching it, I don't doubt that it's worked for them at times or that they actually have got results from this. But as we both know, the one shoe does not fit everybody. But I think as we both have experienced, we try to make a shoe fit that's not fitting more often than not, and it hurts and it causes sometimes unnecessary pain and suffering that maybe potentially could have been avoided, even though it's a part of our journey to grow from it. It's still that if we had the ability or confidence to actually question it sooner, we could have continued to evolve our own understanding or our own methods of these different practices that would have put us in a much simpler position to process, I guess, our life's realities. And I guess that's why this was always going to be a very interesting subject for us to talk out, because it's not necessarily that we disagree with the idea of manifestation or law of attraction, but it had taken both of us in our individual journeys and together to come to a place of finding a version of what that actually sits right with us and that we can actually see results from, is kind of the point. Whereas for many years, and a lot of these practices, we were making ourselves believe we were seeing results, but really, in the light of day, we weren't.
Exactly. Or we were seeing some of those results. And like a perfect example of this is, you often hear with the law of attraction, if you want to attract a partner, you write it all down, you be specific and blah, blah, blah. And I did that. And did I attract a partner? Well, I definitely met my husband and married my husband, and he was everything on my list. But I remember years into the marriage looking at the list going, oh, I forgot to put emotionally available. Oh, I forgot to put this. Oh, I forgot to put that. Oh, okay. So I did manage to manifest everything on my list, but my emotional immaturity and my inability to have that awareness stopped me from really looking at the bigger picture when it came to that. And was my husband the perfect person for me at that time? Absolutely. One of my greatest teachers on the planet, and forever grateful for the time that we spent together and the lessons that I learned. But it was a huge lesson when it came to some of these points that people talk about in law of attraction.
But I think even looking back, isn't it incredible that we're always trying to manifest or attract what we want versus what we actually need.
Yes, that's a very good point.
And I think it's that when you use law of attraction manifestation to go towards the things that you need in your life to actually allow you to grow, for support, for the tools in mind, body, emotions, soul, it's a very different approach to manifestation and law of attraction. And you know what? I feel the results come in a lot faster. If you ask me.
Well, I would agree with that, but you hear me laughing because how many people are going to walk towards what they actually need, and how many people actually have any clue about what they need in order to have... I didn't have a clue about some of the things that I needed. I can tell you that right now.
But we also know when something's not working.
True.
And I think when we know something's not working in our lives, for a long time, none of us actually know how to question when something's not working and how to build a plan towards actually making it healthier for us in a lot of respects. So I think that's a part of the growth, though, because we always know what we want. But even when we receive what we want, then we realize that the grass is not greener on the other side. That's actually not what we need. But it's only when we do that through experience that over time we begin to learn that at our core. And I think it's actually the law of attraction manifestation and how we were taught it 10, 20 years ago is actually what gave us that insight. So I don't think either of us regret at any stage of our understandings or our progression through these teachings or practices. But it's incredible how, even after all these years, there just doesn't seem to be a lot of people talking about this version of law of attraction or manifestation out there publicly in books or even in podcasts or online. And I think that's why we wanted to talk about this, is because there's still, when it comes to manifestation law of attraction, it's still the same conversations from 10, 20, 30 years ago that is still coming up. It's just different faces talking about it.
I absolutely agree with that. And I think to the point that we said earlier, and I want to reiterate, is it's not that we don't believe in the law of attraction or practice the law of attraction. We just happen to know the different side of it that isn't spoken about and want to help people understand and alleviate some of that pain, that it's not necessarily you. It's not necessarily you're doing it wrong. It's not necessarily that you can't have it. It's just about learning how to understand mind, body, soul, and emotions, and what might be in the way of stopping you from understanding yourself, because it's not about the thing. It's never about the thing. It's about understanding ourselves. Yeah.
It's amazing when you get to that place, as you mentioned, through working through mind, body, emotion, soul, that the peace that you can end up feeling in each of those areas of your life, and how that does go with what we talked about in season 1 regarding your own contract of how you do end up manifesting or attracting in the experiences, people, the opportunities that allow you to grow moving forward. And it's such a lovely way to experience life, because then you're not fighting or wishing that it should be different or that it could be different or I'm doing something wrong. And when you remove that, you still have your challenges in life. You still have your financial problems. You still have arguments in your relationship. You still have all of these kind of things. But I think, as you and I have always talked about so many times, is that when you have the tools and the understanding and you're not forcing your life to be a certain way, it's a completely different way to experience life. But you still have all the knowledge, wisdom, and experience over many decades still that you can utilize or use for moving forward. And that's what I mean by, I do wish that more people would actually open up and talk about this side of it, because you're not sacrificing anything by being honest with your experience with the law of attraction. As you said, many people can express the times that it worked, but I wish more people would actually be more open and honest for all the times that it didn't work. And I would love them to question and understand, okay, if it didn't work, do you understand why it didn't work? Because saying it's my fault, it's not an answer. And it goes so much more deeper than that. And that's the journey about understanding yourself more and more, which is what we're all here for.
And I guess people might not do that because they don't know who or where they could talk about it to gain the understanding that they need. And that is why we're having this conversation. And I can tell you over the years, how many times could I have wished and asked for somebody to help me understand it. And I laugh because I go back to that time I first met you. And I'm sure, guys, I drove Gareth, Michael, absolutely insane that day, because it was like, oh my gosh, I've got to get the answers to some of these things because I have so much confusion and I've been taught so many different things. And even when you would give me the answer, do you remember I'm going, but wait a minute, go back. I need you to re-explain that to me, because that doesn't make sense to what I've been taught here. And I'm sure everyone in the room that day was looking at me like, oh my God. But I really wanted the answer. And I really want the people listening to this podcast to understand that if you have those questions, you're not alone. Because for a long time, I just thought I was a weirdo.
But I think this is what was always a huge part of the goal of doing this podcast, because there's so much information out there, and because a lot of us come from religious background, then we explore elsewhere, and then we have life unfolding and positive and negative experiences. There's just a never-ending amount of stuff to try to figure out or to piece together. And I think we wanted the podcast to be a very safe place for us to share how we have taken all of these different understandings and experiences in life, simplified them, and actually connected them with one another to how it actually makes sense, and to simplify it that little bit further for ourselves and for everybody. And as we've always openly admitted, we're still here, we're still breathing, we're still doing the journey, we're still figuring things out.
Absolutely. I am interested in hearing other people's feedback on their experiences with law of attraction, so that we can delve into it even more. This is, I'm sure, the first of many conversations that we'll have about this topic. Thanks so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you would like to explore these topics more with us, please go to www.patreon.com/Practical Spirituality Podcast. Not only will that help us keep producing these shows, but you'll also get advance access to each new episode. the opportunity to ask questions directly of Gareth and I, input into what topics we will cover on the show, access to exclusive content not available anywhere else. See you over on Patreon.